host, Dawn Taylor, and today we are talking to one of my most favoriteest humans on this planet. His name is Reese. He is my nephew. He is a little rock star. He is a genius who can draw like nobody's business. He was also adopted at 3 months old, and today's topic is we're going to dive into what adoption is like from his standpoint. So welcome to the show, Reese.
Thank you for having me here. I am so happy to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this. So what is it that you wish people talked about when it came to adoption?
I feel like the biggest thing with adoption is people assume that I should be like grateful for it, and that I was somehow like, in a sense, like almost rescued from like what it could have been. And so I
Yeah.
feel like the biggest problem with that is people have this ideal that I was somehow saved, but I still had to deal with being adopted all the same.
Whew. But it's true, right? So you and I have chatted so much over the years. I mean, let's be honest, we have connected through our inability to connect, which always makes both of us laugh. But people do look at it as you were rescued, you were saved. And while maybe you were rescued from the situation that was going on with your birth mom and that sort of thing, have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt that you were rescued or that you were saved or any of that?
I think I try to believe it, but it's hard to kind of wrap your head around because I still had to deal with a lot of identity issues that came from being adopted and not knowing who I was. So while I was saved from what could have been a really horrible situation, I still had a whole another package to deal with being adopted.
Let's talk about that. When it comes to adoption, so you were 3 months old when you were adopted. You have 3 older half siblings. So yes, you heard that right. My sister did adopt 4 children at one time. 1 mom, 4 dads. Pretty crazy situation. But you didn't ever know your birth mom, right? But you also had never met your siblings prior to being adopted. And I mean, you were 3 months old, so obviously like it's not this like a big pivotal thing, but they had a different experience than you did.
Yeah, and I think with my older siblings, they came from a situation that they knew their birth family, or at least like my birth mom, which
Yeah.
I never really had. So being adopted at such a young age, I really didn't have any of that foundations. All I knew was my adopted family.
Yeah. And then add to that so there's a lot of people on this planet that have an inability to bond, right? And whether you want to call things like attachment disorders or whatever, but when there's a lot of rejection and there's a lot of issues around even like conception, right? Like we learn to bond in utero, we learn to love in utero. And so when we are born into a situation, and I'm saying this from a standpoint of like, I deal with this.
Yeah.
And I had a reasonably healthy family, right? I wasn't adopted, but around conception and birth and my mom's pregnancy, like I struggle with this inability to bond and the struggle to connect to people in the way that I wish I could. And so being adopted and then also dealing with that, how has that shifted you growing up?
I think to just like talk about like the bonding stuff from like even back to like in utero, you see with a lot of like pregnant women, they like talk to their baby and they like do all these things for like while they're still in the womb.
Yeah.
And I think as I got older, I realized how much of that I didn't necessarily get. So it's like I've never heard my birth mother's voice before. So when
Yeah.
you're at such a young age and you think of all these like things that you do for newborn babies, it's like they smell you and things. It's like I never had that. What I knew was a hospital that I stayed for, and then I just got like shipped away to this entirely new family who were essentially strangers.
Yeah.
I think that caused a lot of like disconnect from them because even though I was in such a loving and caring family, I just didn't have like that immediate, like I wouldn't let my mom hold me for like the first 9 months of my life without crying. I was just like unhappy continuously. And whether you call that like
You were.
just like being a baby, or that was like something deeper that went to like my connection issues where I was so unwilling to be loved at that point.
So talk to me about how that's shifted over the years. So
I
you're now 17,
Yeah,
18, 17.
17.
I should know this. You're now 17, but so you've been in our family for 17 years. How
Yeah,
has that,
so
right? Like your entire life? How have those bonding issues, how has that shifted over the years?
I
And where
think
has it shown up? Like, where has it shown up in your life where you're like,
yeah,
oh, that's an obvious disconnect issue?
yeah, I
Or,
still definitely see it in a lot of my relationships, like even day to day. Like I have a hard time just like having like a general like empathy for people. Not to say that I'm like I don't have empathy at all, but I really struggle to connect to people in like an everyday sense,
yeah,
where I always feel like I'm like there's continuously a wall in between us.
yeah,
So I do see it a lot, and I still have a hard time like seeing my parents as like mom and dad, because that feels like it's a role that I don't have, which is really hard to say because they did raise me and I have all the things that should like qualify them as parents, but like there's almost like a mentality about it of like things they should have been but weren't, because they weren't necessarily like the traditional from like the beginning of like, oh, baby time. I don't know how you
yeah.
would describe that, but
No, but I think so you and I have talked a lot about this over the years.
yeah.
Like you've come and stayed with us at times just to get away. And this is not against my sister. My sister is an amazing mom and her husband's an amazing dad. Okay, so anyone who's listening to this, hear that. But you and I have always just had this interesting little connection and bond. And so you've come and stayed with us for months at a time, sometimes just like to get a break from life, to get away, come hang out, or if you were just like wanting to not be at home for a bit. And you and I have talked a lot about how how do I word this? How it's different to know it in your head than to know it in your heart,
Yeah, you can kind of, it's almost like accepting it for yourself.
right? But also knowing what love is and what love looks like, and that sometimes it's a very big brain decision versus a heart decision when you struggle with bonding, right? Where it's like, I choose to love you.
It's always been like it felt very decision based.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know what love was, and even like today I still struggle in my like relationships, whether just like platonic or romantic, of like what this would actually look like. So I go into just about every like situation with a very almost like transactional lens of thinking, okay, what would this relationship look like? What am I putting in to get out? And so I have a hard time kind of loving unconditionally,
Mhm.
because I don't know how that even looks like.
And again, not a bash towards anyone who
But
raised
yeah, this
you.
is like completely like my perspective. I've received so much love from my family, and I do love them, but it's been like a very like me problem of not understanding how that looks.
Yeah. Which is so interesting. And I think so from the outside listening, right? For someone who's listening to this going like, oh, is this my child? Is this my niece or nephew or spouse, or maybe it's me? Do you have any recommendations on how to respond and react and treat somebody who struggles with that inability to bond and that different connection?
I think the biggest thing would just understand that it takes time. Um,
Yeah.
I think with my parents, my mother has been ever so graciously understanding. But I've had a really hard time, like, even when it's like saying good night, I love you, those words mean a lot more to me. I have a really hard time like getting them out. So I think it's understanding that it takes time for them to understand what good night, I love you essentially means and how that would come across.
Yeah. Well, and I know for myself, it's giving so much grace to be like, I don't fully know or understand what some of those feelings are.
It's a very lonely point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you value the relationships any less. I
Oh,
feel like
not at
that's
all.
like a people think that it's like I'm not completely closed off. I still value all my relationships. It just takes a very long time for me to completely like comprehend them and understand like
Yeah.
these people are okay to have in my life.
So then let's fast forward a few years. You got a Christmas gift from your parents that you wanted.
That I did.
And what did your parents gift you?
My parents, I had been talking about this for a long time of I never knew my birth dad at all, and so I'd been asking
Yeah.
for a DNA like testing kit,
Like an
and that's
Ancestry or 23andMe or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I got. And I ended up going through Ancestry, and I did end up finding my birth family. Um,
Okay,
so
so for anyone listening, 16 years old, all of a sudden finds out you have this entire birth family. And I want to walk people through the situation of how it all went down because that was a fucking whirlwind. Like that is the only way to describe how that Sunday night went. But for the people listening, my podcast episode coming out in 2 weeks, I'm actually talking to my sister. I'm talking to Reese's mom about adoption from her perspective. So we're going to do the other side of this as well, which I'm really excited about. But so you were staying with us at this point.
yeah,
Because you were homeschooling and you're like, I just like Reese and I are buds. Let's just be honest. like we've been pretty tight for a long time. And were we even like sitting on the couch?
yeah, I think we were watching like a TV show. It was like
Probably
the
something
middle of
super
summer.
cheesy. We're eating blueberries because that's what we did together all the time. And you were like, so I got my results. And I was like, what are you talking about? And oh my goodness, it was like I think it was like May or June. And
Yeah.
you had already gotten them like months earlier. And I was like, what are you talking about? And you're like, my 23andMe or Ancestry, whichever one it was. And I said, what? And you're like, yeah, I think I want to reach out to some people. And so tell me if it's okay if I tell this whole story. Is this okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So we are sitting there and I was like, okay, so let's look at this. And somebody had come up, and what was it that they could have been an uncle or a brother?
Yeah, an uncle or a brother.
So one of the relations that had come up was an uncle or a brother. And you're like, I don't know what to do. So part of it is not knowing anything about your birth family, not knowing anything about your mom's situation really when she conceived you. There were a lot of stories, but nothing factual. And there was no names on birth certificates or anything, right? So I know the conversation we had is you're like, how do I reach out to someone and be like, hey, are you my uncle or my brother? Like, do you happen to know a dude that had sex with this woman? I have her name. Like, right. And then we were having this hilarious conversation and we were actually giggling about it of like, how do you approach someone with that information, not knowing, like, does this man have a family? Does this man, like, was
And
he having an
knowing how they would
affair?
accept it as well. Because it would be like, would they
Totally.
be totally open to that? Or like, who the hell are you? Get out.
Oh, 100%. So we stalked this dude on Facebook. We did. And then I reached out to him because I was like, no, let me do the reaching out so that I can deal with the rejection if that's the
Well, I mean, also at
response.
that point, I was some 16-year-old kid who had no clue what I was doing.
Oh,
So just
100%.
contact old men online. If
Oh,
you
come
need a
on.
tip on, cybersecurity right now, don't put everything on Facebook because I found like a lot of information.
Oh yeah, you've like
I made a whole
tracked.
family tree. It was, yeah.
Oh yeah, you're a hilarious little sleuth when it comes to this. But so I messaged this man and was like, "Hi, this is who I am. I am like this is the situation. There was a test done." And to say that the result was unexpected is probably the understatement of the day. Like it was wild. Not only did they know your mom and it was your uncle that I was talking to, but we found out that you had a half sister living 45 minutes away and nephews and a brother-in-law and another half sibling somewhere. And how many aunts, uncles, cousins did you have or do you have?
So in like my aunts and uncles, I have 12, but in the whole family, like including cousins, there's like 150 of them.
Oh, yeah. And then it went further that we found out that your uncles went to school with like some of my aunties, my grandma. So, like, your adopted great grandma had been friends with like your birth grandma for like 50 years. Oh no, like this like blew up in the biggest way possible. We found out that you had aunts and uncles in the town we were living in at the time, and cousins and second cousins. And this was, I think it was a Sunday night. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like, I'm Facebook messaging them. And then all of a sudden, your sister's texting me and you're talking to them. And like, we had how many people showed up at that house within 24 hours?
I don't even know. It was such a wild amount. It was like this complete 180 from like, hey, would you know about like my birth mom at all to like, oh, suddenly there's a family gathering outside my house.
Oh, and I remember you and I sitting there, like, we escaped it at one point and we were just like looking at this, like, this group of people sitting on the back lawn going, this is your birth family. So your dad had passed away about 10 years earlier, but in this wild twist, they had known about you and that you were born, but nobody knew your name, nobody knew where to find you, and no one knew your birth mom's last name
Yeah,
to be able to track you down because you had a half sister that was having kids. Like you have nephews that are older than you.
I do.
Right. And like she had thoughts of even like finding you and adopting you and raising her little sister and no one could find you. So can we talk about that for a sec? Because like it went from zero to hero overnight.
Yeah,
And then they're this beautifully connected family. And they just wanted to love on you and adopt you into their group and spend all their time with you. And like it literally went from I don't have any extended family to oh, I have 150 and 149 of them want to meet me and be friends now.
yeah.
Let's talk
I
about
think
that for a sec. How did you feel? How did you deal with that? What was that experience like meeting him for the first time?
it was definitely disorientating. I kind of went in with the mentality of like, I went into it expecting rejection, and what I got was a
Yeah.
whole lot of compassion and learning that not only had they known about me, is that they had also met my other like half siblings, that they were like wanting to adopt me had they had the chance. And it was this really like
Yeah.
interesting perspective of like they were trying so hard, but they just like didn't have the tools they needed to actually like go through with it and actually like have me as part of their family.
So this life of believing how rejected you had been.
Yeah,
You had actually been so loved and so wanted and so cared for. Like, how crazy is that?
it was definitely a wild experience. It still kind of weirds me out to this day of like understanding just how deep it went.
Yeah. So we started having a lot of time with them.
A lot, yeah.
a lot of time with them, which was amazing. Like it was so cool. I hosted a lot of barbecues. And but you had dates with them. I remember one of the comments you made. So, and keep in mind in all of this, like your parents aren't here. Like your
I don't
adopted
even know how much
parents.
they knew at that point. I was like,
Oh, I phoned
woohoo,
them. Don't
off
worry.
to
I
meet
phoned them.
men.
I phoned them. I talked to your mom about it and your dad. Um, but because it had gone down so hard so fast, your parents were way far away, like opposite side of the province. This is also during COVID.
Yeah.
So like we're trying to like keep everyone 6 feet apart. Good thing we had a big backyard, right? And we're dealing with all of this emotional stuff. But one of the cutest comments ever was when one of your aunts walked in, was it Mamie? Walked in and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tall. Because you'd always struggled with feeling so short. And then you met your birth family
And
and
suddenly they're all shorter than me, and I understand, oh, this is where it happened.
you were like a giant compared to
One of the
so
tallest
many.
in my family.
like literally you had the shortest family. But all of them, every single one of them also had your chin. They all had your adorable little bum chin with your little dimple, right? And it was this. How did you feel? How did you feel seeing that?
I got a lot of comments saying that I look like my half sister. Honestly, I like personally I don't see it, but I think that's just like a eye of the beholder kind of thing. Like I don't think I could see that. But
Yeah.
going into it, it just kind of felt very relieving. I had some kind of reconciliation at that point of
Wow.
understanding like this is where I came from, and suddenly things were kind of starting to fit together because despite me and all like my like siblings having like shared DNA, we still looked very different. And so
Wow.
it was very like this kind of rut that I couldn't get over because it's like even though we were related, I could still pick out so many differences that I felt alienated me from them.
Interesting. Right? So then you have to deal with all of a sudden this. Not only do you have a adopted family that loves you more than anything, and that's one thing that I will give our family so much credit for is when my sister said like, hey, we're going to adopt, and that was all starting, there was never a hesitation. Like nobody was like, oh really, oh what if we, what if it's awkward, or what if we don't, love them as much as we do like the birth kids in the family. No, 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 no. It was never even a hesitation. Like from my grandparents down, all of these generations, every single person was like, hell yes, and we choose these kids and we love them. Right?
Honestly, like that, I really just need to like give such like a big props to everyone in the family for not only like accepting us, but taking us as like we had been there from the very beginning.
Oh, like huge props. Because I know families that that's not the situation. And it's never been, ever been a thing. Like, it's not a thing that you're adopted. It's not a thing that you weren't just born into the family, or that you're
Yeah.
not ours. Like, it's it's never been a thought. And literally, like every aunt, uncle, cousin, my grandparents, like everybody, it was just like, no, 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 you're just our kids. Like, you're fine.
Yeah, honestly, like I think for me personally, because I was adopted at such a young age, I never really had to think about it much. But for my siblings who are all adopted at an older age, it was definitely like they were just without question family, no matter where they came from.
Oh, it was, yeah, and it was like nobody ever talked about it. It was just like, nope, they're family, they're ours, you're
Yeah, I
in.
don't think I've ever really had
Like,
people ask me how it was being adopted because of that. It was just like a no-brainer of like, it wasn't a sensitive topic or anything. It was just like, no, you're family no matter.
Oh yeah. And it didn't matter what behaviors were happening. It didn't matter looks. It didn't matter, like, even when it came to like you finding birth family, everyone was like, cool, more family. Like
Yeah.
nobody was upset or hurt, or I mean, there were some sensitive feels. I mean, obviously, like your parents, and I'll discuss that with your mom in a few weeks, but like,
Yeah.
there were definitely like, shoot, are we being replaced kind of idea. But
Yeah. It was this kind of just like sense of how do we invite this entirely new family into our own?
yeah, like it's never been a thing. Like we've never looked at our nieces and nephews with any sort of division. Actually, we used to laugh about it that we're like, we chose you guys,
Yeah.
right? And like,
There was
because
nothing like accidental about the entire process.
nothing. The entire process from start to finish of adopting you guys and having you in our family was just a miracle. And so it was interesting all of a sudden, like there is a whole nother family and there is this whole other group and there are all these people, but when you're struggling already with connection, and when I say that you guys were accepted, like, no, like my grandma would write you guys letters and gifts. And how many band concerts did my aunties come to and sporting events? Like everyone's just loved you. Like it's never been
Yeah.
a question. But now you deal with like, there's this whole other group, but you're also at like a really pivotal age in your own life where you're like graduating and all these things going on. Can we talk about that process of like the overwhelm of how do I do this?
I think already just because I am quite young, and so I can't really say that I've like made it through all of my life with some like expertise, but I think because of the age I'm already in a situation where I'm like finding my identity and
Yeah.
I'm preparing to leave home and make my own name for myself, right? But when you take into all this like identity issues from adoption, it was really kind of disorientating because I didn't know where to start from.
Yeah.
And so it feels like I've lived so many different lives already, from like having my name changed since I was like an infant to like when I was adopted. And then it was like all these different identities that I could almost like put myself into little boxes of like, oh, from this age I was this person, and then I got adopted and then I became a new person. And
Yeah.
so it felt like there were like very distinct like stages of my life of like who I was at that time. And so
Yeah.
now that I'm getting older, I'm trying to almost put them all back together into one person, of
Yeah.
understanding like, no, that wasn't a different person that was adopted. That was me.
Yeah. There's definitely been some identity struggles, but also then like even finding out like what your cultural heritage is.
Yeah. So that was
Like to add
definitely
to
a new
everything
experience.
else, what did you learn?
Well, I learned I had some like I heard somewhere down the line that my birth mother and possibly my birth father had been of indigenous ancestry. And so I'm probably about as white as you can get. And so it was
You're translucent, darling. Like,
it
like
was a
you're
very different
actually
like, am
translucent. Yeah.
I? And so growing up, like we all had this like kind of doubt of like, are you actually? But through the adoption process, because they knew my mother was of status, that they tried to like keep my history with me, and so that they tried to involve me in like different cultures. And it was very like it was a struggle for me because I never felt like I fit at all for like I feel like I didn't look the part. I didn't know any of the actual history. I didn't grow up like that.
Yeah.
So it felt like I was a complete alien in those um like areas.
Yeah. You know what's amazing though? Is you're just a human,
Absolutely. I'm just
right?
living life.
Like, no matter what, whether you were adopted or not adopted, or Aboriginal descent or not, or, you don't match the coloring, or you don't match the looks, or you don't any of those things. There's this core piece of you that has just been authentically beautiful you from the day I met you.
Yeah.
With all your feistiness, with all of it. Right?
I think almost a part of like with all the identity issues, it made me so determined to become my own person.
Yeah.
That I just like became like wildly unique, that I could not handle being like anything else but myself.
Yeah. Which has been beautiful. So has meeting your birth family, so you even actually got the opportunity, you did get to meet your grandma,
Yeah.
your birth grandma, before she passed away, and spend time with her. I mean, you've had your birth family like travel far to come even like hang out at your parents' house, and
Yeah.
they've met them all, and your siblings have met them, and like you went on a vacation to Disney with them.
Yeah.
Like, it's been a whirlwind, what, year and a half since you met them. In any way, has that actually caused you to be able to connect more to your adopted family? Now that you know where you came from?
I think in some sense it has. It's kind of hard to like put my finger on exactly. But I feel like I definitely appreciate my relationship with my adoptive family a bit more. Um, I was a very angsty kid, so I tried to reject them before they ever like rejected me. I had this just like insecurity of like, because I had been put up for adoption, I was like, oh, are they going to leave again? Um, and
The
so I just
abandonment.
had that like insecurity that I always tried to like push people away. But I think growing up over time, I kind of realized that I just needed to get my head out of my ass and that they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. And
No, we're kind of like a wart. Like you can't get rid of
so
us.
stubborn.
Yeah, you
But
can't
I
burn
think,
us off.
yeah, I think having met my adoptive family, I kind of realized it was like this pivotal point in my life where I realized, oh, there's enough room to love like two different kinds of families. It wasn't just like one or the other. I was not picking sides. It was understanding like I've spent my life with these people, but on the other hand, with my birth family, I understand more of my history now.
Yeah. And I think part of it, like, it doesn't have to be about gratitude. Doesn't even have to be about any of those things. It's like, I was chosen, I'm loved. And sometimes we end up exactly where we're meant to be and where we're supposed to be, whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, whether or not I was like, as I mentioned before, I was really like an angsty kind of kid about a lot of adoption, but I kind of began to realize like, I don't know even how I say this. I'm like losing my train of thought now.
It's okay.
No, I lost my thought.
Okay.
That's bad.
That's all
I'm
right.
gone
It'll come
now.
back. It'll come back. So, for someone who has been adopted and is struggling with the not knowing your birth family, struggling with that identity crisis, struggling with those things, is there anything you recommend to them? Well, you think about that. One thing I would say is give yourself a hell of a lot of grace, right? It's very
Yeah.
normal to feel like you don't fit. It's very normal to feel like, I mean, I grew up feeling that way. I never felt like I fit with my family. Good grief, I did the same test as you did just to figure out if I was adopted, because I had actually bet money with my husband I was.
Yeah.
Like, I fully believed I was because of how different I felt than my birth family, right? And then they're my actual family. And I still like never felt like I fit, right? And I think like It's so normal. It's so normal. And so much of our identity, like that can come down to who we are as people and our values and our morals and our ethics and our standards and our personality traits and all of these things. And I think for myself, I've realized over the years and talking with a lot of friends who've been adopted is all of those things are who you are. It doesn't matter where you came from.
Yeah.
Right? You're still a human being walking on this planet. And those are the things that matter. Those are the things that matter is your actual personality, what you're doing with your life.
I think kind of just to like touch back on like the gratitude piece of it is
Yeah.
when you're adopted and you're like, what would be like your advice to other people in that situation? It's give yourself time, because whether or not you learn to like almost accept of like the piece of adoption, whether you've adopted somebody or you are adopted yourself, it's like in the points, it's just kind of they're going to love you no matter what, because it's, I don't know. I'm losing my train of thought again.
You're hilarious.
I'm so
No.
ditzy right now. I swear. I'm
No.
trying. I swear.
No,
I have good thoughts.
it's also a very vulnerable conversation, but tell me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is like give them time
Yeah, give them time,
on
and it's like,
both ends.
yeah, that's more or less what I'm saying before I become a space cadet again. But
It's all right. We've got you. No, but it's give them time, right? So give your parents time, right? Like your adopted parents, give them time and grace and understanding of the fact that the story they've created on how this is going to go down, how this is going to look, how this is going to feel, what's going to happen is going to be very different than yours, right?
yeah,
And the love might look different, but even in those moments when you are rejecting them or you are pushing back or you are doing those things, it doesn't mean you don't love them.
yeah, and I think that's really one of the biggest pieces of just like knowing that even though it seems like really scary and it's difficult, that it's not going anywhere. Like that's something that's going to like handle eventually. It might smooth out, but even if you like are in a bumpy path right now, it's like it doesn't always have to be.
No, it doesn't. Well, and without telling any of the stories of your siblings, because they're all their own stories.
Yeah.
I mean, when your mom and dad adopted you guys, you were what, 3 months, almost 2, 5, and 6, something like that. Like
Yeah.
you're all about 2 years apart or just around that. But like you guys were really young. And out of the 4 of you, like 3 of you have met some birth family.
Mm-hmm.
One has absolutely no interest, like couldn't care less.
Yeah.
He's very like, no, I got family. I'm fine. I'm good. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't care. Doesn't care. And will that change maybe when he's older? Who knows? But he doesn't care. Right? And some of the situations have gone really well and some have gone not as well. And there have been different struggles amongst it. But I think everyone's story is unique and individual. And if you do want to find your birth family and fight for that, man, it's never too late. I know a woman who she's fought for something like 30 years and she's now found all her siblings.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing, right? And even if the story with your birth parents doesn't turn out amazing, you have no idea the acceptance and love you could get from the extended family.
Yeah, because I feel like from already like my personal experience, like I didn't really have the option to meet my birth dad because he had already passed, but that doesn't mean meeting the rest of the family wasn't just as meaningful.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest moments was when they brought over photo albums.
Yeah.
And we got to sit at the table and look at pictures and see your dad when he was young. And I think there were even pictures of like him and your birth mom when they were dating
Yeah.
that we saw. And they're like, it was wild. And to see the genetic traits and to see that life. And you know what? I think your life would have turned out amazing and has turned out amazing no matter which path it would have been.
Yeah, I think that's one of like the biggest takeaways of like I can't hold it against my adoptive family for like what I could have had, because either
No.
way I've lived such like a meaningful life already that I'm like I don't think I have any teen angst anymore about it. I'm just like happy that I've had the opportunity to like meet both my birth family and have such an amazing adoptive family.
Yeah. We like you. We'll keep
Yeah,
you. I mean, if we have to. You're amazing, Reese. You
I
seriously are.
try.
All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk about when it comes to adoption or your side of it or anything? Or can we go to the silly questions?
I think there's one thing that I would like to touch on, and it was just
Yes.
kind of going back to the birth family bit of like, there's some parts that I don't think can ever be like fully reconciled because, as I mentioned, like my birth
Yeah.
father had already passed. So I will never have that opportunity to like meet and talk to him. Um,
Yeah.
but like that doesn't mean I have to kind of like grieve him in a very unique perspective because I never had him in my life,
Mhm.
nor will I get to because he's not here anymore. But it's like learning how do I deal with that grief and understanding that like I can still continue to like move on and have a relationship with like
Yeah.
my adoptive family and my birth family without him. Because ultimately that was like my whole goal going into like meeting my birth family was to try and meet him, but I didn't have that. So it was just like understanding of like not everything will always work out. And I think you have to be mindful when you go into like, what do you want if you're like contacting birth families? Like, what do you want out of that?
There was that night sitting on the couch. You and I had a big talk about that
Yeah.
before I sent that first message. Is what are your expectations on this? What is it that you're wanting to get out of it? And how are we going to deal with it if you don't get it?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that was probably one of the smartest things that we did prior to sending those messages
Yeah.
because we had already talked that all through and figured that all out. Because I was like, no, 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 what are your intentions? Like,
Because it's understanding that despite being adopted as part of my identity, it's not my whole identity. So
no,
even without having all these like relationships with my birth family, I'm still me. I still have an identity, and I
yeah,
can't let that like completely tear me down.
no. And it was like, I remember asking, like, what is your intention behind this? And you were like, what do you mean? And I was like, what is your intention behind reaching out? What is it that you're needing from this? What is it you're wanting from this? What is it you're desiring from this?
Yeah,
And what if those aren't met? Right?
yeah. Because at that point, it's a very vulnerable position to just like
Oh,
go into this
very.
like whole scenario of understanding like, oh, I have to open myself up to people, and they very well might just completely reject me.
Yeah. Which I was honored. I was honored to be your rejection barrier.
Yeah,
I was so honored to be that person for you that day, right? Where it was like, no, 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 let me deal with the aftermath of whatever happens. But man, we're gonna hope and pray it turns out really well.
yeah.
I'll never forget that day. Do I have permission to post in the show notes a picture of you with your sister and nephews?
I think you might want permission from my nephews and
I will
sister.
ask. Yeah,
Yeah.
I will totally, I
I
can
feel like that's
totally
not up to
ask.
me.
No, but if it's something that you're okay with, so check the show notes at thetaylorway.ca. You might see a picture. I just think those pictures of you just like beaming with your family looking so gigantically tall with matching chins is one of the cutest things ever.
Yeah.
But no, I will definitely check in on that and we'll see. We'll see if one gets posted. But let's ask you the fun little silly questions.
Woohoo. Question
Okay.
time.
What is one of your secret guilty pleasure ways to decompress?
Um, Honestly, it sounds really bad, but isolation. I
Mhm.
I absolutely love just like curl in a blanket, hide, put on YouTube, just like chill, like taking time to just like hide.
You have been that way, I think, from the day you were born.
Yeah, my mom has definitely had stories of like me being 2, and like I would be over at my grandma's house and she'd be like, "Where is Reese?" And I would just be like playing in a corner in a closet.
Oh,
Like I just hide.
we used to literally set up toys in the bottom of our closet so that you would have a safe space to
Yeah,
go
that's just
and
what
hide.
I would do. It was
You've
like my little
always
like
done that.
sensory closet. I would just like hide.
I love that so much because it's so you. Describe yourself in one sentence. Or just a bunch
Stubborn.
of,
I feel
pardon?
like stubborn. Stubborn. I feel like I can just minimize that to one word.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I also agree with that in a major way. What do you spend a silly amount of money on? What are you up to these days? And spending your
Clothes.
money on?
Clothes.
Clothes.
Yeah.
That's a new one.
I like big boots that are like 6 inches tall. They're like knee high, 6-inch
Mhm.
platforms, leather, lots of zippers.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You're so funny.
I spend a lot of money on chains and these big spiked collars. So
Gotta love you. You're, you're seriously so amazing. Could not love you more. Well, Reese, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope listening to this, to my sister who I know is listening to this, I hope that this was interesting and insightful for you to hear a little bit more at a deeper level what's been going on with Reese over this last little bit. But for anyone else, if you know someone who has been adopted or you've adopted kids, I hope that you listen to this episode and also check in on the one in 2 weeks where we dive into this from the other side as her mom is coming on the show. But also know that you're not alone. Know that you're seen, you're heard, you're all of those things. And I hope you got something out of this episode. Join us again in 2 weeks for another amazing topic, adoption from the mom's perspective. And also tell your friends, the more people that feel understood, the better. Reese, thank you for being here.
and thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Check out those show notes located at thetailorway.ca for more information and all the contact information for myself if you're needing to do some coaching or some healing work in your life on what's been going down, or the contact information for Reese. I think we're going to put your page up for your art if it is still available because you are a phenomenal artist. Subscribe now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you love the show, please leave a rating and a review. See you guys in a few weeks.